We're here today on behalf of Hamilton College Jazz Archive with drummer and percussionist Bob Rosengarden,
Thank you.
friend of Hamilton, and you've made how many annual trips here?
Many, many, many. Thanks to Milt Fillius.
Yeah. It's a pleasure to have you again.
Thank you.
Last night's concert
Wasn't that a good
the
one?
tops.
I'm not being false modesty and any of that kind of stuff. It was one of the better ones. Clark Terry has the knack. He's a catalyst, and he kicks everybody in the butt and makes them play, whether you want to or not.
The people watching this didn't get to see the benefit of the rehearsal that went into that, but describe the 5
the
minutes.
almost rehearsal, you mean?
Yeah. 5 minutes at dinner, said, here's what we're going to do, and this is okay with everybody, and it's an education to watch that.
Well, we've all known each other for so long. You know your business, and I know my business. And we know a lot of things you don't have to say, because if you have to say them, it's too late.
I read in the Grove Dictionary of Jazz, it says that you started playing drums seriously at 12.
Yeah.
Does that mean before you were 12 that was just...
I started playing at 5. My mother was a pianist. She played the hell out of Shine On Harvest Moon. I remember that. And she was a musician. She was a piano player in a silent movie house where my father used to sit there and do a whole bunch of movies and fell in love with her, and they got married and that kind of stuff. And there was always music in my house. We had a piano. My dad, during the Depression, my dad wasn't working very much. And we always had a piano. And I assume, doesn't everybody in the middle of the Depression have a Steinway in the living room? And my mother would play the piano, and I would sit there with pots and pans and spoons and clunk away. And there was a local drummer. This is in Elgin, Illinois. There was a local drummer who was in high school, Russ Gady. I can't remember my children's names, but things like that I can remember. And Russ Gady was my first teacher. Showed me how to hold the sticks. And I didn't know any better. I practiced.
You practiced?
I practiced.
What a unique idea.
I didn't know you weren't supposed to practice. I just went ahead and practiced. I loved playing. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I never had to go get a job. Because I don't think of this as a job. I consider myself very fortunate.
Yeah. You're doing what you love.
Always have.
Yeah. You were in the service, correct, and did some marching band?
I was in the marching band before that, at the University of Michigan. I went to a scholarship, a music scholarship. And I got drafted out of there. And of course, I knew how to do all that stuff. And I ended up in the 75th Infantry Division Band, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. The old joke is if they ever give the United States an enema, that's where they're going to... You can edit that out if you want.
No.
Yeah. It was really one of the most terrible places in the world, Rolla, Missouri. Or Missouri, as they say. But I played with, again, that important thing, as you know, in your business, you played with people who played better than you did. And I learned, you learn what not to do. You just look around, and you don't have to be particularly smart, you just have to watch. And you had to play all kinds of music, which is fine with me.
Well, that idea of learning what not to do, we've heard it a number of times.
And I also learned an important lesson. There are only two kinds of music: good music, bad music. So I try to play as much good music as I possibly could. And worked my way up, after the war. Worked in nightclubs, Copa, Bill Miller's Riviera, owned by that mythical organization. And met some people who were very helpful, and still are. Skitch Henderson, for example, who was a conductor at that time, piano player for Frank Sinatra. And I found myself, it was, you know, a job at NBC because Skitch lady friend, Faye Emerson, who was a wonderful movie star and a funny, bright woman, beautiful woman, and she was a friend of Mr. Sarnoff, which was very helpful. So I found myself on the staff of the in radio at the National, we call it the National Biscuit Company, but NBC, the broadcasting company. And every once in a while I'd think, how did I get here? And I played, in those days, I made friends with a comedian who I still think was one of the greatest comedians of all time, Ernie Kovacs. And Ernie and I became good friends. And he always called me Rosie. I mean, I didn't have a first name or a last name. It was Rosie. And he was very good to me. And he was going with Edie, his wife, wasn't wife then. And I stayed at NBC, and he had this wonderful, crazy, zany show. And I always wondered how it stayed on the air, because he would do outrageous things. Sometimes he'd come in totally unprepared and just make it up as he went along. And it was like a quartet or a trio or something like that. And of course, I learned, those were my vaudeville days. I learned how somebody fell down, you catch it, boom.
Yeah.
That kind of
All the classic percussion.
All the very classy things. And then, in those days, the guy came along, Steve Allen, and we're still good friends, and Steve came along and they had the Sunday night show with a big orchestra. Skitch was the conductor. I mean, it just kind of moved right that. And then record recording sessions. And in that NBC band, well, Doc Severinsen, of course, he was the other young Turk. But there were Will Bradley, was a very well-known trombone player, band leader at one time. Jaime Scherzer from the old Benny Goodman band. A whole bunch of people were in that NBC staff. And it was the job of jobs.
When the big band era kind of faded out, a lot of the musicians found a home.
Oh, yes. That was the best job. You don't have to travel anymore. You stay home, and the money was good, and you were treated nicely. And if you worked, this was before tape, so you had to be there live, the live shows. And then Carson came along, and Skitch, again, went right in with that, and he was the band leader on the first Carson show. And that was a wonderful band. It was a great band. Doc Severinsen, of course, was there. Tommy Newsom, as a matter of fact, was in that band. Jaime Scherzer from Benny Goodman. Clark Terry, Snooky Young, all giants, musical giants. And we saw each other more. We saw our kids, our families, because those were live shows. We did those live. And we made them they were put together with spit and chewing gum. We just floated through.
I was going to ask, when you showed up for a day at work at NBC, did you know what was in store for you that day?
I had no idea and couldn't have cared less. I mean, I just showed up. I know. I always came from, in those days, because there weren't that many good musicians, new guys, who could play. I always prided myself, and it's not false modesty, I think, that I liked, there are only two kinds of music, good music and bad music. So I didn't mind having to play a polka. It didn't really bother me. You can do it well. And I had a classical, musical background. So I found myself, again, slipping and sliding right into the NBC Symphony, because I was one of the new boys. And there was a conductor there at that time by the name of Arturo Toscanini. Dumb luck.
But you were ready.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, how many, you sure as hell better be ready. Because, and the old man couldn't see too far away. He was very, he had to be right there. So he would look over and he'd make some gesture. And hopefully I'd figure out what it was he wanted me to do or not do. And Carson adopted us. I mean, he loved what, Doc still involved with it. I still, every once in a while hear from John. And again, slipping and sliding, we're doing record sessions all the time, every day. And we all saw each other every day in recording sessions. I used to do three record dates a day and a television show every day, 7 days a week. It didn't do much for my family life, truthfully. Of course, both of my sons are musicians, so I can think they just slid into it, And my wife was very patient at the time. I didn't bother her. I wasn't around much, And we had the kids just, of course, my dad's a musician. I'm going to do the same thing.
Yeah. So in effect, even though the days of traveling on the road were tough for the family type situations, that this was another kind of hard.
Oh, yes, well, I was away. I worked all day. I had usually a 10 o'clock record date or a jingle date in the morning, 10 to 1. They went 3-hour increments. And then 2 to 5. And then we had a rehearsal. It started at 4:30, but Skitch didn't care. We came in late from the recording session. And then after the Carson show was over, because they taped it early, and then there was usually a jingle date or something after. I mean, it was every day. Wow. It was a wild and wonderful time.
There's a picture of, I think Milt Hinton took of you playing a ratchet or something.
Oh, that's right.
Anything that came up.
Any percussion sound. Oh, yeah. Oh, Milt. Dear sweet Milt. He's not too well these days, unfortunately. But we became very close friends. But those were such wonderful, wonderful days. And then one of the writers on the Carson show was Dick Cavett. And I had been doing recording sessions, and Harry Belafonte, remember the Banana Boat song?
Sure.
J-O. No. Well, I always liked Latin drums and things, and bongos and conga drums. So I kind of, since I could read music, and that was never a problem, I never thought about it. I just did it. So I was one of the few, quote, long hair players capable of playing that could also do the other stuff. And I didn't do it because I'm going to show you sort of thing. I just did it because you do that.
Yeah.
And we used to do I did all the Belafonte dates, recording sessions. Every once in a while I run into him. It's old home week. It's nice. But I just was slipping and sliding right through that. And then Cavett came along, and his manager, who was also Belafonte's manager, knew me from that, said, Dick is going to have a television show at ABC. Would you be interested in being the leader? I thought I was going to kiss him on the lips. And I said, yes. And I said, but I don't have a library. I mean, he said, well, that's not a problem. We'll get one. And in those days, there were lots of good arrangers, Tommy Newsom, people like that, who wrote well and fast. And so I can remember giving assignments, I need 14 arrangements yesterday,
Wow. Did you give them the song titles?
Oh, well, I found a gimmick that worked for me. Since Cavett did not have a musical ear, does not have a musical ear, he used to say, I used to kind of begrudge it, but it was a compliment. He said, I don't know anything too much about music, but everybody tells me this band is wonderful. What's the typical Cavett remark, and we'd all go, he said, but it's the best band in town, And I picked anybody I wanted. The job paid a lot of money. It was staff orchestra at ABC. That's when the three networks were, you know, the American Broadcasting, and National Broadcasting, CBS. And I brought in a lot of good players. Walt Levinsky was my lead alto player. I had Snooky Young, Jimmy Maxwell, wonderful trumpet player, who kind of gave up playing. He teaches, I think. I had, in those days, ABC had very few black people in the band, in the orchestra. And they knew they had to do something. It was a time that the blacks were making waves about this, and the timing was right. So the edict came down from the brass up in ABC, use as many blacks as you can. It was as plain as that. And I said, that's fine.
Yeah.
I don't care what color they are as long as they play. And I hired two bass players, Milt Hinton and George DeVivier. And I said to them together, I said, they were very busy recording all the time. I said, I don't care who shows up. One of you guys has to be there every day. Now you figure out your schedule. No surprises. I don't want to see any strangers. One of you guys has to be there. And if you're half an hour late, just let me know that you're going to be half an hour late. We'll work it out. And it worked out. They loved it.
What was a typical day? How did it run for that show?
We would tape in the afternoon. When I say afternoon, it was late afternoon. We'd start usually 6 o'clock, something like that. 6 to 7:30. It was an hour-and-a-half show. And then everybody would run to an 8 o'clock or a 9 o'clock record date. It was just, we of course didn't realize that eventually it would end.
Yeah.
But all the people I played with last night, you know, we all did this together. It was the best of all possible worlds.
From a logistical standpoint, how did you drummers manage that?
Oh, we had a whole bunch of us who did recording sessions. Finally got smart. I don't know who thought of the idea. Donald Mann was a very busy drummer in those days. There was a guy who has since died, Terry Snyder, who was doing the Como show. Very good drummer. Eddie Shaughnessy. There were a whole bunch of us. So what we did is we would get a drum case. Each had a drum, would contribute a drum case with a snare drum and stands and sticks and brushes and cymbals. Since I did a lot of Latin work, I would carry my bongos, which is like a little suitcase. And so, and in each studio, we got together and decided, okay, I'll have my drum case at RCA Victor, 24th Street. You have yours at Columbia 30th Street and the jingle houses and so forth. So there was always a drum case there. And we had a combination lock with the same combination so that the strangers couldn't come in and borrow things. And as a result, we'd finish the job, and on the Cabot show, everything stayed the same. The set stayed the same. We'd finish, get off, grab a cab, go down to the next session, to the section, walk in, open up the lock, take out the snare drum, whatever you needed. You know, it was the best of all possible worlds. I mean, I don't think about it anymore, but now that we're talking about it, you know, it was as good as it sounds.
Was there a method in place at that time where you got royalties or any of that kind of?
It started, we got a small percentage. But, for example, if I were to do something that entailed over and above just opening the music and playing it, if I had to create something, in other words, they say, we don't know what we want to do. On a jingle, they would say that. We want a certain sound. What have you got? And then, depending on your own makeup, you would think to the producer, when you fill out the little withholding slip, you put down 3 doubles, which meant over the,
Oh,
you know, so you would get a bonus like that. But if you contributed something, they didn't object to it either.
Mm-hmm.
It was good all around. And, you know, it sounds, oh, come on, you got to be kidding. But it's true. It's all true.
They're showing some of those DeCavett shows.
I know they are. On
John Lennon was on it.
VH1.
Yeah.
Well, my wife and I saw it. What was the show, Sharon? What was that show? What was? You can say it out loud.
Well, they had John
Lennon. It was
Lennon.
done in England. It was.
Oh.
No, it was. Wasn't John Lennon? It was one of the other. It was a Beatle. It was
George Harrison.
George Harrison.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the
Right.
only one I've seen.
He
With
had
all that hair.
A lot of hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you only heard the band. Now, when we went to England to do the show, I just took the library with me and used an English band, the BBC band, which was a wonderful band. I knew guys that I had known. You know, our business very small. Everybody
Right.
knows everybody all over the world. And then I got into the jazz business and started doing jazz festivals. So we all.
Well, were you on the show of John Lennon that they used in Forrest Gump?
Somebody said that they heard me laughing. Yeah, I was on that show. I'm not a shy laugher.
Uh-huh.
And somebody called and said, I heard you last night. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I saw a movie, John Lennon, and there was somebody laughing in the background of it, and I knew it was you.
Yeah.
It was your laugh.
That's great.
Yeah, it was incredible. And then one day, the bubble burst, where shows changed. I mean, everything changes. We didn't like to think it did. And the staffs were let go. There were a few shows that were left. I think Godfrey's show was still on at that time. But they weren't staff jobs where there was a steady job where you got a weekly salary with pensions and all that kind of stuff. Thank God, you know, those. And then I found myself in the jazz business, you know, doing jazz festivals and concerts and all over the world.
What was the reason for that kind of abrupt
Economics.
change?
Economics.
Studios got together and said, you know, this is not...
You know, the efficiency experts that happens all over the world came in and said, do you realize how much this, you know, how much the NBC Symphony is costing us? Now, when the old man Sarnoff was alive, he said, that's what I want. You know, but Tuscany left, and Sarnoff died, and then the cost accountants came in. Why are we spending, you know, why hire a $37 violinist when we get one for 12? You know, that kind of thing.
What did the union have to say about that?
I'm going to not have a comment. The union, by that point, was, how can I put it delicately, lost their guts. They had made so many sweetheart deals with various things that they made a terrible mistake. When Petrillo was alive, the head of the, you know, in Chicago and all that kind of stuff, those days didn't last that long, but they were wonderful days as far as the musicians were concerned, because this is the way it's going to be. It was Achtung. But then it eventually, you know, it really was economics.
Was the technology that was happening have an effect also?
Oh, of course.
Electronics and all that?
Oh, yeah. You know, and all the new toys came in. And it's funny that you mentioned the Cabot show. I got a call several months ago from somebody in California. I didn't know who it was. And they said, I'm calling from Local 47, you know, AFM, the musicians, and somebody is going to just bought 26 Cabot shows. They're going to cut them up. They have the right to do that. And there will be some, you know, rerun money on that. And I have learned many years ago, and I still get some reruns on sing-alongs, you know, with Mitch.
Oh.
the Thanksgiving show, Christmas shows. They still, somewhere in the world, they play them. And if I get $37, you know, it's you know, dumb luck.
It's nice to see that that kind of thing works.
Yeah.
That somewhere in the world they're playing this, and
Oh yeah.
eventually you get your piece of it.
You know, you'll get a, you know, small amount, but whatever it is, it's 13 bucks.
Yeah.
It's my $13.
Didn't you do a thing with Benny Goodman when Igor Stravinsky was involved too? What was that like?
It was quite an experience. I think about it every once in a while. Benny was a difficult man to deal with, to work for. He was Jewish, but he was Adolf Hitler.
Oh.
He was mean. Indifferent and callous and mean, and played his buns off. He was an inspiration when he played. But he didn't like people, didn't care. I mean, it was a gesture that he, you know,
Oh. It was just
all of us who,
dismiss
you know, he would do this, which meant go away. Yeah, not a nice
Yeah.
man. Played better than anybody. And they won't let his memory die. I just did a tour of Japan, 2-week tour, just recently, a few months ago. My wife and I had a great time. You know, Peanuts Hucko was Benny. He became Benny, you know, because Benny had died. And there are lots of Bennies around. Abe Most from California, he does a Benny imitation too. Walt Levinsky does it. A couple other clarinet players too. Sal Yeager tried to, but he wasn't that good a clarinet player.
Well, you have to be fairly accomplished
Oh
to
yeah, Benny
pull
was
that
a
off.
wonderful player. Of course, he fired me. Fired me many times. I mean,
Many
he fired
times.
everybody, yeah. One story I remember, he called me, and he had a strange voice on the phone. Bobby. I mean, his voice was going down. Oh, Bobby, this is Benny. And I said, yes, I know. Yes. He says, Bobby, tell me something. True story. And I said, well, what is it, Benny? He says, am I mad at you? And I said, I beg your pardon? He says, am I mad at you? I seem to remember that I'm mad at you. I said, I don't think so, Benny. The last time we worked together was a long time ago, but I don't remember throwing a cymbal at you or you throwing your clarinet at me. He says, well, never mind. Can you do such and such, and like that. And then he never called me again. I mean, then I did the job or whatever it was, and he just couldn't care less. But Bobby, am I mad at you?
That's funny because you know what that voice reminds me of? It reminds me of the woman who played Benny's mother in the movie they made about it.
God, I don't remember that.
Steve Allen played
Yeah, I
Benny
remember,
Goodman.
yes.
But the woman who played his mother talked just like that.
Well, somebody was being funny then, because he talked like, you know, Bobby, you know. And he had these gestures, these strange gestures. He was odd.
Yeah.
Played good.
Wow.
God, he played good.
Well, he has a whole chapter devoted to him in the jazz anecdotes.
Oh,
You know,
their stories are
everybody's
still
got
popping
stories.
up. Everybody, I mean, every once in a while we go to the jazz festivals all over the country, which are quite popular, all over the world. On this tour of Japan, there were a lot of alumnus of Benny's bands of one time or another. And of course, get a couple, you know, drinks of sake, and we sit around and tell Benny Goodman stories, you know, and fall on the floor.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Well, how did the thing with Igor Stravinsky happen? Did he wrote a piece?
Well, I did a lot of work at Columbia recording studio. And Igor Stravinsky had signed to do this, and he wrote this piece for Benny. And they needed people who could read music, because they didn't want to waste time, and Stravinsky's writing was difficult. It was one of the very few times, if not the only time, that I ever saw Benny uncomfortable, where he was not in charge.
Oh.
He was second banana, and we all sat. I mean, Doc Severs was in that band. We sat there, and just relished it, like your turn in the barrel, baby. Yeah, it was. I got a chance to do some recordings like that. I'm very proud of. You know, I don't listen to it very often. You know, I think about it every once in a while.
Yeah. He did something for Woody Herman, too, I think.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, Woody wasn't in the class.
Kind of an odd
Woody was a
mixture.
lovely man,
Yeah,
but he
but
wasn't in
not
the
Benny.
class with Benny.
Right.
Yeah. And there's so many, Benny, they still won't let him die. There's still, you know, guys going around. But people loved it in Japan. Paid hundreds and hundreds of dollars to come and dance for half an hour or so and then listen to a concert. And Peanuts, Hucko was a good clarinet player. Does a good Benny Goodman. I told Peanuts several times, I said, Peanuts, if you're not mean enough to be the good Benny Goodman. I said, yeah, I'll be mean. They said, no, you can't.
Just fire some people for old time's sake.
Yeah,
Or just
you know,
pretend.
or he'd go, don't play.
Oh, boy.
Oh, he did it many times.
Yeah.
He'd look at a player for no reason, and he'd look at them and he'd go, don't play.
That's about the worst thing you can do, almost, I would think.
Yeah, well, he
just
couldn't
to
have cared.
dismiss you as a player.
Yeah, he couldn't have cared less. He was not a nice man. Played good. Ooh, did he play good? You know.
You got in on some Ellington sessions, too, right?
Yeah.
That must have been an interesting
He
experience.
did. This was the days of those ping pong recordings. You know, the stereo, when stereo really became very big. And Duke did a whole thing with percussion, with the big band, with his band. Sam Woodard was his drummer, was a wonderful drummer. I loved the way he played. I do an invitation to say, I mean, when we do Duke Ellington charts, any big band, if I remember working with him, I do an imitation of Sam Woodard playing. I'm a good mimic, because it fits, it works. Why would I play Benny Goodman style? It doesn't work. Duke was a lovely, wonderful man. He came on the Cabot Show several times, and he would use the band. Of course, he loved George Duvivier. He kept wanting George to go on the road with him, and George, no way, no way. They were wonderful golden years.
Yeah. George was kind of a protege of Milt, wasn't he?
Well, Milt is still this way. He's still the daddy of them all. He's not physically not well. He's got some problems. I understand he's getting, you know. Sharon, how old is Milt now? 86 or 87. Yeah, 86 or 87. His wife's not too well.
Yeah.
She's got some problems. But they are the nicest people. And I can't think of one nasty or even off thing about Milt, ever. He's always been a gentleman to everybody, kind, generous to a fault. I can go by my, you know, asking myself, if I called him and said, Milt, you've got to do this thing for me because I need you for something like that, and I can't pay you anything, he'd say, okay.
Wow.
You know, fortunately, it didn't happen very often, and he would take off from someplace else to do this because we were friends.
Well, you can measure, I think, how Milt and Mona are looked upon by when you see them at a festival or something. They can't even get down the hall because so many people just want to be around them. And
They are good people. They really are good people. All over the world, he's known. Somebody told me that he's getting better.
I heard that.
Yeah, I'm happy to say. And we call every once in a while, you know, call them up. And Milt, he wants to play physically, you know. I don't think he has the energy yet. He may have now. Who knows? He does this.
Well, you're part of the trio, which...
Kenny DeVerne?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And...
Wellstead?
Yeah.
That was a wonderful trio. I didn't even mind not having a bass player. He only would have gotten in the way.
Oh.
I listened. I have tapes I play in the car when I'm going someplace. And listen to, you know, I listen and I think, damn it, that's good. That's what we meant.
Uh-huh.
Kenny DeVerne is a most unusual player. He's not a Benny Goodman freak. He plays like Kenny DeVerne. Plays like no one else. I think Pee Wee Russell would have been closer, except that Kenny's a better clarinet player. He's a most unusual player and plays his heart out. There some moments when we work together quite often, that just are inspiring. One of the bass players that was at NBC in those golden years was Bob Haggart, who was another giant and doesn't know how to play badly. He can't. And he loves to play. And if I call him or, you know, and say, we're going to go to Broken Jaw, Nebraska to do such and such, you know, okay. You know, he likes to play.
Yeah.
You know, he might ask, who's the piano player?
Good writer, too.
He's a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
Wonderful
You
arranger.
guys are all part of my inspiration.
Oh,
Kenny's
yeah.
record.
What's New?
Right. Yeah.
The list of, you know, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, all that stuff.
Who named the world's greatest jazz band?
Dick Gibson.
So it wasn't one of the players.
No. Dick Gibson was still alive out in Denver. An impresario. I mean, he was a businessman who did very well. And he loved Hag and he loved Yank Lawson. Yank was quite a drinker in those days. And so Yank would mumble a lot, but and Hank was just Mount Pleasant. He was always pleasant. And I played in that band various times. Cliff Lehman was the first drummer. He was the wonderful, and Cliff did a wonderful job for that band, much better than I did. I imitated him. I did my mimicking. I imitated what he did, but he meant it. And I enjoyed playing with that band because there were good players in that band. Of course, I love playing with Hag anyway. He's such a good player. Such a good musician. I don't think it's telling tales out of the school. We call him the Fog. I mean, he kind of goes away.
He goes away.
You know, you've seen it, you talk to him, and all of a sudden, you know, he just left. He just left. He comes back.
Yeah.
He comes back. And he laughs at himself about it, too. He always looks so serene when he goes away like that. I think to myself, gee, I wish I could do that. I wish I could do that.
Yeah. Now, you've been a part of so many interesting ensembles, the New York Repertory.
Yeah, jazz repertory.
Yeah.
Kenny DeVerne gave them a new, you know, the new NYJR, New York Jazz Repertory Company.
Yeah.
And the minute Kenny saw those initials, he says, the New York Jewish Rowing Club.
He has a kind of unique sense of humor.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy. Have you interviewed him?
Yeah.
Oh, then you
Yeah.
know
He has some very strong opinions.
about everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even last night he had a strong opinion about a candy machine that
Oh, yeah.
didn't give him what he wanted.
Yeah. What do you mean?
And
You know.
he got it
Well, I'll bet
from the
he did.
machine.
Did he
He
kick
says,
it?
I'm from New York, I get this. And yeah, he kicked it.
He kicked it, of course.
Yeah.
He's a piece of work. Plays. He's one of the last of the Mohicans. He plays like Kenny DeVerne. No one else. He doesn't play like Pee Wee Russell. He can imitate. He doesn't play like Benny Goodman or Artie Shaw or anybody else. He plays like Kenny DeVerne. One of a kind. He really is. And I love to play with him because his time is so good. You can go away and come back 3 days later and the beat is right exactly where it's supposed to be.
You know, a lot of the gentlemen that we've talked to that are in their 80s and so forth, like Buddy Tate and so forth, they all mentioned that when they were coming up, everyone was striving for an individual sound. And I don't know if that's happening now. I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but
Well, first of all, there were many more musicians. There were more jobs, so therefore there were more musicians. There aren't that many musicians anymore. Aren't that many jobs. I feel badly for kids in school here. I'm sure every once in a while someone's going to come up and really turn out to be a player of one kind or another. You know, where the hell he's going to work? I mean, it used to be you can go to a nightclub, which is the job, you know, to support a family. Not anymore. Unless you go to go to Vegas or a place like gambling casinos where they have shows. All the LA guys that the film studios got rid of, you know, a lot of them moved to Vegas. Billy Watrous, I think, just moved back to LA. Carl Fontana, Frank Russolino, before he died, you know, all those guys, all the LA guys. We see each other occasionally at jazz festivals. There's still a few here and there in Arizona and places like that.
So the idea of jazz education, in a sense, is wonderful, but in another sense, it's like, I don't know where they're going to go with this education, except to educate more people.
You said it in a much nicer way than I would have, because I see it doing this, getting less and less and less and less and less. It's a shame because it's our music, America's, popular music, and that's one of the few things that we are respected for all over the world, American jazz. You would have thought that we were the second coming in Japan with the Benny Goodman thing. The same sing, and all that stuff. And it was a good band. It was a good swingy band. There's a lot of good players. And I found it inspiring when the people got up and danced. And there were some young people there who had no reason to know Benny Goodman, but I guess because it was Western and you know, their parents told them this was the truth. And did reasonably good business. People showed up, played.
In a world social sense, that's so interesting because here's music that was popular in the late 30s and the 40s, and then we had World War II with these two nations against each other.
Of course.
And now
Germany
embraced that.
Yeah. They just hated us. They didn't hate our music. Yeah. Or at least the governments anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, everything changes. One of the advantages of having funny colored hair, you realize that.
I have to comment on a couple things last night that are an education in themselves, and one of the things is the use of volume and lack of volume.
Dynamics.
There was some times there where everybody was just going, leaning forward.
That was the whole idea. Less is more. Yeah. You learn that when you get the funny colored hair.
The funny colored hair.
Yeah. It's true. It's called music. I listen at home, to my wife's chagrin, I listen to long hair music almost all the time. The only other kind of music I listen to is Brazilian music. I have a soft spot in my head for that. I got friendly with a lot of the Brazilians, Jobim and Louis Bonfa. And I saw Black Orpheus 37 times, and I said, oh my God, what is that? And loved it, and became I was the only gringo who could imitate that.
Right, and knew the difference between the different Latin styles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to say, well, play this Latin. Well, there's a lot of...
Well, the Brazilian is different from Latin. I mean, it's Latin's over here and Brazilian's over here. It's closer akin to jazz, the feeling of, in a technical sense, Latin music is generally even eighths. Like that. And Brazilian is you know, at kids at school, I tell them, see this? It's not this. It's and you have to imitate it with your mouth, the sounds. Listen to Brazilian, listen to Portuguese language. You know, it's very musical. It does this. Yeah. It undulates. Yeah, which is great.
I love that vocalization. That's what Clark does too. You know, like he's trying to get a point off to some student instead of.
He'll sing it.
Yeah.
Didn't he play good last night?
Oh man.
I can't remember him playing this well for a long time. I thought there was a period there where, you know, boy, are we going to miss him. And
well, he put in a year last year, from the looks of his schedule, doing his 75th birthday tour that would have taxed anybody.
Well, if you want to know something, if he hadn't done it, he would have melted. My wife gets mad at me sometimes because I take jobs. And I know she realizes I do it because I want to play. I love to play. Can't believe people pay me large sums of money to do exactly what I love to do. And the first question I ask, the first question I ask is, who am I fighting? Who am I playing with? And when I got called to do this, you know, Milt Fillius called me and he told me, I'd like you to do this thing at school, up at college. And I'd say, great, Milt, because we're friends. And who am I fighting? You know, who's going to be there? He said, well, Clark, you know, Johnny Bunch, and Bob Haggart, Kenny DeVerne, you know, Dan Barrett, and, you know, wow.
Can't beat it.
That's right. Beats the hell out of working.
How long have you known Milt?
Since I came to New York. I knew who he was because he was with Cab Calloway's band. This was in the 40s.
I meant Milt Fillius, actually.
You didn't know Milt?
No, I'm saying, I wondered how long you knew Milt Fillius.
Oh, Milt Fillius. Oh, I met him out in Arizona, I think at a jazz, wasn't it? Yeah, in Arizona, at Paradise Valley Jazz Party. Did these wonderful parties Don Miller throws. They still go on. They're wonderful. And Milt, well, you know him because of the school, but he puts his money where his mouth is. He loves jazz to the point of, you know, supporting it. And he looks forward to these as much as we do. And I never, he'll ask me, how do you feel about this guy? And I have learned, I have funny colored hair, everybody plays good. Some people play better, but everybody plays good. And anybody gets to a certain level. And I said, well, why do you want Joe Blow? He says, well, we have had him here and so forth and so on. Or I couldn't get this guy and I couldn't get this, well, I could get him. Well, he's fine. That's fine. Don't fight. When he told me that Clark was going to do it, and first question I said, how is Clark? You know, how is he? He said, no, he's fine. He's going to be fine. I had no idea he was this good. Because this is the Clark I remembered and loved from, you know, the last picture. But Milt Fillius is, wish there were more Milt Filliuses.
Help keep the music happening.
Yeah, he believes in it.
Yeah.
Puts his money where his mouth is. I like that, you know, that he, and it's nice that this school, I mean, I didn't know this school before I came up here the first time, and it's like an MGM idea of what a college should look like. It really is. I mean, I can see Peter Lawford and, you know, and Benita Granville and all those people, you know, in their costumes, the sweaters, you know. Lana Turner as a teenager, you know, I can see it here. And it, you know, and of course the weather this weekend has been incredible. I said, Fillius, you must have friends in high places.
He does.
Oh, I'll say
All
so.
places he has friends.
Yeah, he should have.
Yeah. What's the immediate future for you? after you leave here?
I have to ask my wife.
Okay.
Sharon, what am I doing? Oh, yes.
Pops.
Thank you.
With your old friend Skitch.
Skitch.
Yeah.
Scratch Anderson, yeah. I'm doing the Florida Pops. Skitch Henderson is conductor of many Pops orchestra. He does the New York Pops and so forth. And he's an old friend and has never forgotten it. And I've never forgotten it. When he calls me, I say yes. I don't even ask what it is. And he's always been a good guy. Likes music. I never ask how much, because I'll do it anyway. And so he's got Walt Levinsky, myself, a bass player. He could get somebody, couldn't get Hag, I think. So I recommended somebody I knew down there, a young guy that he didn't know. I said, Scott plays good, don't worry about it. You know, I'll shepherd him through. And who else is, is that it? Could be. I don't think Bucky's there. I think Bucky's, but he's doing some Pops things. Clearwater, St. Pete, and Tampa. And I love warm weather anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to going down there. Yeah. Being at the right place at the right time is very important. And in my career, it has always been that way.
Yeah.
And for most of us who are in the television or / radio television business. And many, many years ago, I was the band leader at the Rainbow Room. The guy who ran it at that time was a restaurateur by the name of Tony May. A really good restaurant. And somewhere along, he had a partner who was, to my mind, was like Adolf Hitler. I mean, he was Achtung, everything had to be just so. And eventually, they parted company, and they lost the Rainbow Room. And then Tony May, opened a very elegant Italian restaurant in New York City on Central Park South, a very posh area, San Domenico. The way in downtown Rome would be the right one. And every New Year's, I mean, we're friends. Known as his daughter, who now works for him in the office. I knew her when she was a little girl. And Marissa, sweet little girl. And she talks to me, it makes me sound like I'm 112 years old, Mr. Rosengarden. And I finally said, no, Bob, you're old enough now, you can call me Bob. So I provide a band for him for New Year's Eve, a quartet, some good players in New York, and the money is never a problem. And I said, I can't be there, Tony, because I'm not going to fly up from Florida because I live there in the wintertime. But I'll make sure you have and we've done this for many years. So the other day he called, Marissa called and said, Bobby, put the New Year's Eve thing together and so forth and so on. It's all taken care of. And my erstwhile partner, Tony Sotos, who was a wonderful singer and a saxophone player, was going to take care of it. And then the next day she called again. She says, she was giggling. And I said, what? What's so funny? She says, you won't believe this. I need you on October 12th, which is another week from now. Why? I mean, what are you talking about? My dad, the restaurateur, who has friends in high places, is giving a surprise party for Luciano Pavarotti. And I said, you can say, I said, no shit. and she said, yes. And we've got to have this, we've got to have a group. I said, but it's like 10 days from now or 2 weeks from now. That October 12th is a very busy night. And fortunately, my partner who's in Vegas, I'm flying him in, And unfortunately, I can't be there because I'm in Tampa with the orchestra, the symphony. And Tony, the boss, said, as long as, your Tony is going to be there. He'll take care of it. And so when I called my partner, and I said, how would you like to do a birthday party for Luciano Pavarotti? And you know Eddie Montero? He plays a synthesizer and an accordion player, really, jazz player. Wonderful musician. So we rounded up, you know, greed conquers all, as you know. And we got this, but I mean, my wife is furious because we were invited.
Right.
But we can't be there. You can still go alone, dear. Yeah. You won't do that. You won't do that.
Oh, man. Great opportunity.
Is that
That's wild.
Is that being at the right place at the right time?
Yeah.
And you know there's going to be a lot of wine drinking, and you know that he's going to sing. Of course he's going to sing, you know. And I already told Eddie Montero, who's a wonderful piano player, I said, you better get a hold of a bunch of records.
Yeah.
Because you know he's going to say, oh, solo mio, boom, B flat, boom.
Man, that's pressure. Derek Smith tells this great story about that. You remember? He
Yes.
got called to do Good Morning America.
Yeah.
He got home, it was on his answer machine or something.
Yeah.
So to accompany him.
Yeah.
And he showed up, you know, real early. He's like, oh, my God, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
No one would give him any music, whatever, you know, and he's...
No,
all
he's
hung up.
very loose.
Finally, he says, well, talk to his manager like 3 minutes before airtime. And he says, oh, yeah, okay. So he gives him a piece of, it's like Deck the Halls or something. It was a Christmas deal. He was all like, oh, I'm going to have to, like, you know,
Yeah.
play something.
It's got to be at least, you know, Tosca. Yeah. Is that the weirdest thing?
Oh, man.
Dumbest thing? Luciano Pavarotti.
Well, I'm sure you'll be here same time next year.
I hope so. I sincerely hope so. Can I bring my wife? May I?
I think it's okay. You both have behaved yourself very well.
She's,
so
we're not done yet. So.
Oh, yeah. It's only Saturday afternoon.
Anyway, it's nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Great pleasure. On behalf of Hamilton College, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Have a good gig tonight.
Thank you. We're going to try. Lord knows we're going to try.